Okay, good morning, ladies and gents. Thank you, Dave. So, I guess one of the main headlines from this year's budget, according to the Daily Mail, is pension power to the people. And if you ask the Daily Mail, I think they'll take full gratitude for this. They've been lobbying for a good few years now to try and increase the ISA allowance and make pensions a bit more consumer-friendly. Okay. So, kicking off, looking at the ISA limits, there's going to be quite a significant increase in the current limits. It's going to increase to 15,000 from July the 1st this year. They're going to get rid of the old cash ISA and stocks and shares ISA differential. So effectively, you'll be able to have a combined ISA allowance of £15,000. And how you use that's going to be up to you. So you could have £1,000 in stocks and shares and £14,000 in cash. So that they're basically lifting the restrictions there quite significantly. There we are, very nice. Most of the Lamborghini Aventador. This budget's been known as the Buy Yourself a Lamborghini pension reform. Just out of interest, could I have a show of hands to see how many people in the audience would consider buying a supercar with the pension? just these guys. Responsible accountants, okay. So, I don't think Lamborghini are going to have to up production just yet. I spoke to my dad after the budget, and he was talking about buying a classic Ferrari or, something along these lines, But I think when I explained to him that a tyre costs upwards of £1,000, it kind of put him off a bit. So, usual habitat for this type of car, probably Alderley Edge High Street. I don't think we'll be seeing many elsewhere. But in all seriousness, it's a long overdue rationalisation of the pensions system in the UK. It's been very welcome, particularly from people at or close to retirement. The insurance companies haven't taken too kindly to it, unfortunately, because a big part of their business is annuity business. So we saw a big drop-off in share prices for many of the major insurers last week. So if we look at the system as it stands in 2 days' time, the 27th of March, there are some transitional rules coming in for the next 12 months. So we've still got quite a complex system until April 2015, but they have eased up on the legislation quite significantly. So if we go through things from the left-hand side, you will be able to withdraw the entire fund if your pension value is below £30,000, which is good for people with smaller pension pots. Then we've got people who have funds worth more than £30,000. Under current legislation, you can still withdraw the entire pot, but you'll be whacked with a 55% tax charge. So, if you can avoid that, I think most people will. So we'll see a lot of people deferring taking retirement benefits until April 2015. The annuity, the traditional route for people with smaller pension pots. An annuity, very simply, is a guaranteed income for life. Not the most exciting of options out there, because effectively you hand over your pension fund and you kiss goodbye to the capital in exchange for an income for life. Now, if an individual was 65 today and wanted to buy an income of £20,000 a year for life, they'd need about £450,000 sat in the pension pot. And when you consider the average retiree's pension fund itself is only worth £40,000, we're a long way off from that aspiration. Next on the list, we've got capped drawdown, which effectively means that your pension fund stays invested in retirement and you simply draw down an income each year within limits set out by government. Now, the government has eased up on those limits and said you can take effectively 25% more income drawdown from your pension pot over the next 12 months. Then on the far right, we've got flexible drawdown, which they've eased up the rules here. You used to have to have a minimum income of £20,000 a year. If you're lucky enough to have a pension income of 20k a year, you could effectively draw the entire pension pot down in one go, or as much as you like. But going forwards, what we're going to find is, from April 2015, you're going to have three straightforward options, really. So you'll still have the ability to take 25% of the pot tax-free, as a tax-free lump sum. You'll have the boring old annuity option there, and some researchers have suggested the annuity market's going to shrink by about 85 to 90% over the next 12 months. And the big one is this, withdraw the entire fund, which is going to be great news for a lot of pension savers. Gone will be the 55% tax charge we discussed on the previous slide. But I think most people will be quite cautious initially, because you've got to remember, if you withdraw the entire pension pot in one go, you will be taxed at your marginal tax rate. So my advice to people would be, look at your own tax position. Everyone's situation is different, but try and phase withdrawals over a couple of years to keep your income tax liability down. So again, we'll have the normal annuity and drawdown products. But, feedback from clients so far has been, very positive. It's a real, easement in the very strict legislation we're used to in the UK pension system. But I still think most of our clients will look at a combination of these options. A lot of clients like the guarantee of an annuity, income for life. But at the same time, you've got more options now. So it's a real positive for the pensions industry in the UK. So I've put together a very simple, it's a very specific example. This is suggesting a higher rate taxpayer has invested £100,000 into a pension pot. Now, the important thing to point out here, for a higher rate taxpayer, you get 40% tax relief on the amount you pay into this pension. A company, so any owner-managers with their own company in the room, they can get corporation tax relief if their company pays a contribution into their own pension. So pensions still remain very tax effective. You get these big tax savings on the way in, which you don't get with ISAs. On the way out, this is assuming the following week this individual draws the pension down as a lump sum. So the entire pot's drawn out and paid into this individual's bank account. Now, if you remember, 25% of the fund is tax-free. This portion here, the remaining 75%, is taxed at whatever that individual's income tax rate is. So assuming this client has no other income in this tax year, they've retired, the only income they've got is this £75,000. So they'd be taxed at just over £18,000 in this tax year. So it's an effective tax rate of 18.7%. So overall, this individual's had tax relief for over 20% because they've had this higher rate relief on the way in. Okay. But again, that's a very specific example. You would expect over time that £100,000 to grow in value. And I did some figures. If that fund had grown to 150,000, this tax rate would be about 24-25%. So still very effective, particularly for higher rate taxpayers. So I think that's quite enough of pensions. Some very good news on pensions. I think we'll move on to have a look at what's happening in the economy. Now, we're due to have GDP figures and inflation figures out later today. So it'll be interesting to see how they've fared over the past month. But we've had an unprecedented 5 years of base rate at 0.5%, which has really helped stimulate the economy. It's been great news for people with mortgages, borrowings for businesses. Not great news for savers, but it's really helped get us out of the mire we were in 5-6 years ago. I don't think the Bank of England are in any rush to increase base rates. I think it's going to be at least 18 months before we see the first rate rise. The futures markets, the swap markets, which kind of predict the first base rate rise, are looking at about 18 months' time for the first rise. What we're finding is with mortgage rates, the fixed rate deals, the 3 and 5 year fixed deals are starting to creep up again in anticipation of a base rate increase next year. Unemployment rate, that's dropped quite significantly. This time last year, the rate was 7.8%. So, we've seen a significant drop in the rate there. Economists are suggesting we've still got a lot of slack in the economy, so people, obviously perhaps aren't working the number of hours they'd like to be. We've got 0 hours contracts, part-time contracts. So there's still a lot of slack in the economy, a lot of spare capacity out there. GDP, good news on the UK growth front. We're now the fastest growing Western European economy. Q4 last year, GDP was up 0.7%. So, quantitative easing, low base rates, all helping us get out of the problems we're in. Inflation's dropping below the 2% benchmark set by the Bank of England. So that's good news for people. Cost of living's allegedly dropping. I don't know what people think of that. I certainly don't think it is when I get my fuel bill. Wage growth, that's what's really holding the economy back at the moment. Wages are increasing at 1.3% per annum, so significantly below inflation. So we need to, as an economy, increase the average wage. At the bottom here, we've got something called the Big Mac Index. I don't know if anyone's familiar with The Economist magazine, but it's just a light-hearted take on the relative value of most of the global currencies. So it's suggesting in dollar terms how much it costs to buy a Big Mac, which is a homogeneous product that's sold all over the world. So what this is suggesting is the Japanese yen is significantly undervalued, which I think most people would agree with. The UK and US exchange rate is pretty much on parity. I don't know, there are arguments for and against that. And then that the euro is overvalued against most major currencies. But again, like your McDonald's fries, I think you should take that with a pinch of salt. There's a lot of economists who've, not even been as accurate as this, but, it's a bit of a fun way of looking at currencies. Okay, so moving on, a short look at some year-end tax planning ideas for you. We have a strange UK income tax system in the respect we have a few spikes where the marginal rate of tax can go up above 70 or even 80%, and in some cases 100%. So you can see basic rate taxpayers, you pay 20% on earnings up to about 42k, then it shoots up to 40%. And then people earning 150k plus, the tax rate shoots up to 45%. So you may wonder what these spikes are here. So the first one is affecting people who have children, so households with kids. Now, anyone with children under 18 is entitled to child benefits. However, as soon as someone earns 50k a year plus, every £1,000 of that salary, those earnings, you lose 10% of your child benefit. So it's in effect another tax. So if you've got one child, you're looking at over 50% as a marginal tax rate here. 2 kids, 60%. 3 children, 70%. And if you're unfortunate to have more than 5 kids, then you're looking at over 100% as a marginal tax rate. So sort of things you can do to combat that are things like paying a pension contribution to bring your taxable earnings down, salary sacrifice. So I think it's a very punitive tax. So if it's a husband and wife, one earns 50k and the other spouse earns 10k, you will be hammered for tax on this. So, if you're in employment, talk to your employer about potentially looking at salary sacrifice. I'm not saying turn down a pay rise, but there are ways and means to try and mitigate that tax. Here we've got another spike which actually affects people who are earning between £100,000 and £120,000 a year. So for every £2 of earnings above 100,000, you lose £1 of your personal income tax allowance, which results in a marginal tax rate of 60%. So again, similar strategies, use pensions, salary sacrifice to try and get yourself out of that situation. And I say to clients, unless you've got 5 or 6 kids already, another one on the way, try to reduce your earnings below that threshold if you can. Fair enough, if you're earning £250,000 to £1 million, there's not much you can do about it. But if you're on that threshold here, there are ways and means to get out of that tax trap. So that's income tax. Capital gains tax planning. Again, most of our clients, with a bit of planning, can avoid capital gains tax. It's a tax, you can choose when you pay it. It's effectively when you dispose an asset, a share, a business, an investment. Now, the top 2 strategies here are using that classic tax planning tool, the spouse. So, husband and wife, people in civil partnerships can transfer assets between each other. The top one here, bed and ISA, is effectively selling an asset. So say you had a share portfolio with a gain, you'd sell those shares and buy them back within a tax-free ISA. The next one sounds a bit saucy. Bed and spousing. That's very simply selling an investment. Again, it could be a share, and then the spouse buys that investment back in his or her name, and potentially paying a lower rate of tax. Again, you can transfer assets between husband and wife without an immediate tax charge. So the lower tax-paying spouse can then sell the assets and pay a lower level of tax. If you're making a gain in a tax year, you can realise a capital loss. So if you've got 2 shares, one standing at a large gain, the other's standing at a loss, you can offset the 2 by realising that loss. And a little known fact is you can carry forward capital losses indefinitely. So as long as you register that loss within 4 years of the end of the tax year of making that loss, you can carry it forward to future tax years. So a very useful planning tip there. And lastly, inheritance tax. There was nothing particularly exciting in the budget this year with regards to inheritance tax, or for that matter last year. David Cameron was actually talking yesterday. He was speculating about potentially bringing in the £1 million threshold they were talking about before the coalition government was formed. So, I wouldn't hold your breath on that one, but it's certainly on the radar again. Some simple tips. Every UK resident has an annual exemption of £3,000, so you can gift assets up to £3,000 a year, and immediately that's free of inheritance tax. If you've got surplus income, you can make gifts out of that income. So, if you're lucky enough to have a very large pension income, perhaps in retirement, and you only use 60 or 70% of that, you could use the other 30%, let's say, and gift that to children, grandchildren. As long as that's a regular pattern, say monthly, and it doesn't affect your standard of living, that income is a gift that immediately is exempt from inheritance tax. Quite a common one, the lifetime gift rule. So as long as you survive 7 years from making a gift, it falls outside of the estate for inheritance tax purposes. So thank you for listening. I'm going to hand you over to Mike Donnan, who's going to go through a few issues facing businesses. Thank you.